November 1944. The Hürtgen Forest breathes in slow, cold rhythms. Rain falls without hurry, as it has fallen for weeks, a steady percussion on the thick canopy of ancient pines. Water drips from needle to needle, gathers on bark, runs in silent rivulets down trunks that have stood since the days of Charlemagne. The forest feels older than nations, older than war itself. It has sheltered armies before, Romans, Franks, Prussians, and always it has given the defender its quiet alliance. Tonight it seems to promise the same. Deep behind the German lines, in a bunker carved into a hillside and roofed with logs and earth, General Erich Brandenberger stands alone beneath the weak glow of a single bulb. The air is damp and smells faintly of wet wool and kerosene. On the rough table before him lies a map, its edges curled from humidity, marked in careful pencil with the latest reconnaissance. American positions near Wassenack appear thin, stretched, uncertain. The rain has grounded the Jabos. No thunder of engines disturbs the sky. For the first time in months, the forest belongs entirely to those who know it best. Brandenberger's eyes, however, are not on the map. They rest on a small photograph propped against an ammunition box. A young man in Fallschirmjäger camouflage stares back, serious, proud, barely 22. His son, Lieutenant Karl Brandenberger, serving with the 3rd Battalion of the 5th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, the very unit now held in reserve a few kilometers to the rear. The boy's smile in the photograph is cautious, as though he already understood that youth and war rarely coexist for long. The general's hand hovers near the frame but does not touch it. He has done this every evening for weeks, a private ritual of acknowledgement and dread. He is 62. He has survived Verdun, the retreat from Moscow, the slow hemorrhage of the Eastern Front. He knows, with the clarity that comes only to the old and the defeated, that the war is already lost. Yet orders still arrive from higher headquarters. Counterattack, restore the line, hold until the wonder weapons arrive. He could refuse. He could plead shortage of ammunition, exhaustion of the men, the impossibility of success. Many generals have begun to do so, quietly preserving what remains of their divisions. But refusal would mean disgrace, perhaps arrest, and the abandonment of men he has led since Normandy. And there is the photograph. The adjutant, Captain Lehmann, waits silently in the corner shadows. He has served Brandenberger for 3 years and has learned to read the general's silences. Tonight the silence is heavier than usual. Lehmann knows what the reconnaissance reports suggest. A brief window, a chance to push the Americans back from Wassenack Ridge before they consolidate. He also knows about the lieutenant. Brandenberger finally speaks, voice low, almost conversational. The forest will protect them, Lehmann. It always has. The trees are thick enough to stop anything but direct artillery, and the Americans have little of that forward. No air, no observation, just men against men, as it was meant to be. Lehmann says nothing. There is nothing to say. The general straightens. Signal the battalion, immediate counterattack at dusk, main effort along the Call Trail toward Wassenack. Speed and silence, no preparatory fire, we keep the surprise. Lehmann salutes and disappears into the communications trench. Brandenberger remains standing, staring at the photograph a moment longer. He tells himself the rain is Germany's last ally. He tells himself elite troops in familiar terrain can still prevail. He tells himself his son is a soldier like any other, and that a father's love must not interfere with duty. None of the sentences feel entirely convincing, but they are enough to carry him forward. 2 kilometers away, in a shallow assembly area screened by dense firs, Major Klaus von Harbach sits on an overturned crate and writes by the shielded glow of a pocket torch. The letter is to his wife Margaret, back in the quiet university town of Göttingen. He has begun many such letters in the past 4 years and finished few. This one begins simply. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then perhaps the forest has kept its promise after all. Tonight we go forward again, into the same green darkness that has swallowed so many. Yet I feel strangely calm. The rain has silenced the American aircraft, and the trees stand as they have for centuries, sentinels that no shell can truly harm. I think of you in the garden last summer, the way the light fell through the linden leaves onto your hair. He pauses, listening to the soft voices of his men around him, checking weapons, sharing the last cigarettes, speaking in the low tones of veterans who no longer need bravado. These are good men, many of them boys still when they jumped into Crete, now hardened into something quieter and more dangerous. Von Harbach folds the single page carefully, though he has not finished it. There will be time later after the ridge is taken. He slips the paper into the breast pocket of his tunic, buttons the flap, and stands. The battalion moves out in column, ghosts among the trunks. No one speaks above a whisper. Boots find soft places between roots, rain masks whatever sound remains. They know this ground intimately, the way the trail dips, where the underbrush thins, how the mist clings in low pockets. Confidence is not loud here. It is a quiet certainty, born of experience. The Americans are recent arrivals, road-bound, noisy. The forest will even the odds. Initial contact is almost gentle. Outposts overrun with knives and muffled pistols. A frightened American sentry taken prisoner before he can fire a shot. The lead company pushes forward another 500 meters against only scattered resistance. A runner comes back with word. The enemy line seems to be pulling back, abandoning prepared positions. Von Harbach allows himself a thin smile. Perhaps the Americans have finally learned respect for German paratroopers in close country. Reports filter back to the bunker. Brandenberger listens to the voices on the field telephone, calm and professional. Minimal resistance, prisoners taken, continuing advance. For the first time in weeks, the general feels something close to hope. He pictures his son moving forward among those silent figures, alive, purposeful. The forest is doing its ancient work. Farther back, along the logging track now churned to mud, Sergeant Jack Miller from Iowa sits in the open turret of an M16 multiple gun carriage. The vehicle, 4 water-cooled .50 caliber Brownings mounted in a powered turret, was designed to kill aircraft. Tonight it points forward, level with the ground, belts of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition already loaded. Miller checks the traverse mechanism once more, though he checked it an hour ago. Beside him, the crew brews coffee on a small stove, speaking little. They have been told to expect a counterattack. The rain has kept the sky empty, but it cannot keep the Germans immobile forever. Miller wipes condensation from the gun sight. He thinks briefly of the cornfields back home, flat and open, nothing like this endless, dripping green wall. He wonders what it would be like to fight inside such a place. Then he stops wondering. Wondering is not useful. A generator has started somewhere behind the American line. A low mechanical growl almost lost beneath the rain. Belts are checked one last time. Safety switches remain on, for now. The first wave of Fallschirmjäger continues forward, deeper into the pines, certain that the old rules still apply. And then, deep in the American lines, a small generator coughed to life. The generator's cough became a steady growl, then faded beneath the rain. In the American lines, Sergeant Jack Miller felt the familiar vibration travel up through the turret ring as the hydraulic pump engaged. He settled behind the guns, thumbs resting lightly on the butterfly trigger. The 4 barrels pointed into the black wall of trees, motionless for now. Around him, the crew spoke in murmurs, passing a thermos, checking the ammunition boxes one last time. They had rehearsed this. They knew what was coming. Forward in the forest, the lead companies of the Fallschirmjäger pressed on. The initial success held. Prisoners shuffled rearward under guard. Young Americans, wide-eyed, some still clutching half-eaten rations. Von Harbach moved with the second wave, guiding his men along a narrow ravine that skirted the main trail. The rain had softened the ground. Boots sank ankle-deep but made almost no sound. He felt the folded letter against his chest, a small square of warmth in the cold. He told himself he would add to it by morning, describing how the forest had once again proved faithful. Then the night changed. It began as a low, uneven stutter far ahead, almost lost beneath the rain, a sound like heavy canvas being ripped in long, deliberate tears. The men in the lead company froze for a heartbeat, trying to place it. Then the trees around them began to explode. The quad 50s opened fire together. 4 streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds, each tracer a glowing red eye, hosed into the pines at waist height. The effect was not like artillery. It was intimate, mechanical, relentless. Trunks 3 feet thick shuddered as rounds struck, spitting geysers of splintered wood and burning phosphorus. Resin ignited instantly. Green boughs flared into orange torches. Men simply ceased to exist in the beaten zone, torn apart, flung backward, erased. Those on the edges fell screaming, legs shredded, uniforms alight, the air filled with the sharp stink of burning pine sap and something far worse. The sound was beyond description, a sustained, roaring chatter that rose and fell only when the guns paused to cool. Steam hissed from the water jackets as overheated barrels glowed dull red. Miller traversed slowly left to right, walking the fire across the axis of advance. He did not think in terms of enemies, only in terms of angles and coverage. The tracers told him where the rounds were going. The sudden absence of movement told him they were doing their work. In the bunker, the first reports arrived fragmented and breathless. A company commander's voice, calm at first, then cracking. Heavy automatic fire, trees bursting, cannot advance. Static swallowed the rest. Brandenberger leaned over the map, tracing the reported line of advance with a pencil that trembled almost imperceptibly. Lehman stood beside him, face blank, but his eyes betrayed the same dawning unease. Another call came through minutes later, this time from a platoon leader farther to the flank. Enemy appears to be withdrawing, minimal resistance here, request permission to exploit. The voice was eager, almost triumphant. Brandenberger seized on it. A breakthrough. The Americans were pulling back under pressure, abandoning their heavy weapons. It was the kind of report a commander prays for in the 5th year of a losing war, evidence that the old virtues still matter. He did not ask for confirmation. He did not wait for runners. Hope, thin and treacherous, flared in his chest. He pictured the ridge cleared by dawn, the line restored, perhaps even a brief pause in the endless retreat. And somewhere in that advance, his son alive and moving forward with the best battalion in the division. "Commit the reserves," he ordered quietly. "2nd and 3rd companies to reinforce success on the left. Push through to the ridge road. No pause." Lehman hesitated for the first time in 3 years. "Herr General, the first wave has achieved a breakthrough," Brandenberger cut in, voice steady but edged. "We exploit now or we lose the moment. Issue the order." The adjutant saluted and turned to the radio set. Brandenberger remained at the table, staring at the photograph. He told himself the forest was still doing its part, channeling the attack, shielding the flanks. He told himself the heavy fire was a desperate American rearguard, soon to be overrun. He told himself his son would understand the necessity. Out in the shattered pines, the survivors of the first wave crawled rearward through mud and burning debris. Von Harbach found a captain from the lead company, huddled behind a splintered stump, face black with soot, eyes vacant. "They have some kind of electric weapon," the man whispered. "It never stops. The trees, they just come apart." Harbach placed a hand on his shoulder, said nothing, and moved forward to see for himself. He reached the edge of the killing ground and understood. The ground ahead was carpeted with splintered trunks and bodies. Fires burned in steady orange sheets where sap had caught. The air stank of cordite and scorched flesh. And still, from somewhere deeper in the American line, came that unending mechanical roar, rising and falling like a living thing. He teed his handset. "All companies hold and reorganize. We will advance again when the reserves arrive." His voice sounded calm even to himself. Inside, something cold settled. The letter in his pocket felt suddenly heavier, as though the paper had absorbed the rain and the blood. Back at the M16, Miller's crew swapped ammunition boxes without speaking. The barrels steamed in the drizzle. A loader paused to vomit quietly over the side. Miller noticed, but said nothing. He felt the same faint nausea, the same fleeting wonder at how efficiently the machine did its work. Then he pushed the thought aside. There would be time for wondering later. Another wave of Germans appeared at the edge of the fire-swept zone, shadows moving deliberately between burning trunks. Miller traversed toward them. The guns spoke again. In the bunker, more reports trickled in. Confusion now overlaid the earlier confidence. "Heavy casualties, cannot locate forward elements, request instructions." Brandenberger listened, face growing rigid. Lehman stood motionless, reflecting the general's growing fracture like a dark mirror. Yet the false report of withdrawal lingered in Brandenberger's mind. A cruel ember. If they pressed now, if the reserves struck home before the Americans could recover, he could still salvage the night. He could still prove that courage and bloodlines and the ancient forest mattered more than whatever new devilry the enemy had brought forward. He looked once more at the photograph. The young lieutenant seemed to watch him, trusting, expectant. a father's love twisted into duty's final demand. In the flickering light of his bunker, Brandenberger issued the order he could no longer justify, even to himself. The reserves moved forward into a forest already bleeding fire. Rain still fell, but it did little now. The heat from burning trunks turned water to steam that drifted between the pines like battlefield fog. The second wave advanced in smaller groups, using every fold of ground, every shattered stump for cover. They no longer moved with the quiet certainty of the first hour. Now, they moved like men who had seen the new rule written in splinters and flame. Major Klaus von Harbach led what remained of his command group along a shallow draw, boots slipping in the mud. Around him the battalion had contracted, companies reduced to platoons, platoons to squads. The mechanical roar ahead never fully stopped, only paused as if to reload and breathe. Each pause brought a fragile hope that the weapon had finally exhausted itself. Each resumption crushed it. Von Harbach paused behind a fallen giant whose roots clawed at the sky. He pulled the unfinished letter from his pocket, unfolded it beneath the faint glow of a shielded torch. The paper was damp but intact. He added a single line in hurried pencil. "The forest burns tonight, Margaret, not from shells, but from something colder. Pray for us all." He folded it again, returned it to the pocket over his heart, and waved the men forward. They obeyed without question. These were Fallschirmjäger. They had jumped into Crete under heavier fire than this, or so they told themselves. But Crete had been men against men. This was different. In the bunker, the voices on the radio began to break. Not in volume, German discipline held there, but in something deeper. A young lieutenant reported calmly that his platoon was down to 12 men and could no longer advance. Another voice, hoarse and distant, asked repeatedly for the location of the regimental aid station. Then came fragments. Trees exploding, cannot see the enemy, only the fire. Brandenberger stood motionless, one hand braced on the table edge, listening as though the words were physical blows. Lehman remained in the shadows, face impassive, but his eyes followed the general with growing alarm. He had seen commanders crack before, some with rage, others with tears. Brandenberger did neither. His fracture was quieter, more complete. The old certainties were peeling away like wet wallpaper, revealing nothing beneath but raw doubt. A new call cut through the static, clearer than the others. "This is Lieutenant Brandenberger, 3rd Company. We are at grid, heavy casualties. Request instructions." The voice was steady, professional, recognizably his son's. For the first time that night, the general's composure slipped. His hand tightened on the receiver until the knuckles whitened. "Hold your position," he replied, surprised at how normal his own voice sounded. "Consolidate and await the final push. The ridge will be taken by dawn." There was a pause, filled only by the hiss of rain on the bunker roof. Then, "Understood, Herr General." No hint of recognition, no private word between father and son. Just duty transmitted across burning trees. Brandenberger released the handset as though it burned. He stared at the map, but the pencil lines now seemed meaningless. The forest was no longer a shield. It had become a butcher's block. Yet he could not order withdrawal. Withdrawal meant abandoning the wounded, conceding the ridge, inviting the Americans forward again tomorrow. And somewhere in that fire, his son waited for the final push that would never succeed. More reports arrived, each worse than the last. The mechanical fire had shifted, sweeping the flanks now, catching the reinforcing companies as they emerged from the tree line. Survivors spoke of trunks detonating like grenades, of men cut in half by invisible blades of steel and phosphorus. One sergeant, voice shaking, described how the trees themselves had become weapons. Great shards of oak and pine hurled faster than any bullet. Von Harbach reached the forward edge again and saw the full extent of the slaughter. The ground ahead was a moonscape of waist-high stumps and burning debris. Bodies lay in attitudes of sudden arrest, some still clutching weapons, others curled as though asleep. The air stank of resin, cordite, and the sweet sick odor of burnt flesh. And still the guns spoke, their tracers weaving red lattices through the smoke. He gathered the remnants, perhaps 80 men from a battalion that had begun the night over 600 strong. They looked to him not with fear, but with the exhausted patience of soldiers who have seen the impossible become routine. Von Harbach felt the letter against his chest and thought briefly of Margaret reading it by light alone. Then he pushed the image away. "We wait for full darkness," he told them quietly. "Then we go forward again, in small groups, no bunching. Use the dead ground. The guns cannot see everything." The men nodded. They understood. This was no longer about victory. It was about reaching the enemy close enough that the machine would finally fall silent. In the American lines, Sergeant Miller's hands ached from the trigger. The barrels had been changed twice. Steam still rose from the fresh set. Around him, the crew worked in silence, feeding belts, clearing stoppages. The loader who had vomited earlier now moved with mechanical calm. They all did. The night had taught them efficiency. Miller allowed himself one moment of reflection. He thought of the farm in Iowa, of combining wheat under open sky, of a world where problems were solved by weather and work, not by this endless mechanical tearing. Then the shadows moved again at the edge of the firelight, and he traversed toward them. The guns spoke. Back in the bunker, Brandenberger listened as the voices thinned. Fewer calls now, longer silences between. Lehman poured coffee that neither man drank. The rain on the roof sounded louder, as though the forest itself were weeping for what it had witnessed. The general's eyes returned to the photograph. The young lieutenant seemed to gaze back with mild reproach. Brandenberger wondered, not for the first time, what his son would think of him tomorrow. If there was a tomorrow. A father who had sent his only child into fire, because ancient faith demanded it. A general who had believed 3-foot trunks could stop what industry had designed to remove them. The last coherent report came just before midnight. Von Harbach's voice, calm and distant, acknowledging receipt of orders for a final effort under cover of darkness. Then static, thick, and absolute. Brandenberger stood alone in the lamplight, listening to the rain and the silence beyond it. The forest he had trusted, the virtues he had served, the bloodline he had sought to protect, all of it burning now in mechanical fire. Night settled over a forest that had already ceased to exist. Absolute darkness was the only remaining ally. Brandenberger's final order reached the survivors by runner and whispered handset. Infiltrate in small groups, no firing until close enough to grenade the positions, accept any losses to reach the enemy line. It was not a plan born of hope. It was the last gesture of a commander who could no longer recall the men, but could not yet abandon them. Major von Harbach gathered the remnants under a stand of pines that still stood intact, their needles dripping like slow tears. Fewer than 60 men now, shadows with soot-blackened faces and eyes reflecting the distant fires. He spoke quietly, voice stripped of ornament. "We move singly or in pairs. Follow the draws, no talking. If you reach their wire, pull them out with you." No one asked what happened if they did not reach the wire. They simply nodded, checked the last grenades, and melted forward into the black. The forest floor was treacherous, ankle-deep mud, tangled roots, bodies that could not be avoided. The mechanical guns had fallen silent for longer stretches now, as though the Americans too were husbanding strength for what remained of the night. Steam still rose from hidden barrels. The smell of hot metal lingered even in the rain. Von Harbach moved 20 meters behind the lead scouts, the unfinished letter sodden against his chest. He no longer thought of adding to it. He thought only of Margaret's face when the telegram arrived, and then he stopped thinking of that as well. Sergeant Miller, high in his turret, scanned the darkness with tired eyes. The crew had draped a tarp over the guns to keep the worst of the rain off the feed mechanisms. Beside the M16, 3 massive 60-inch searchlights waited under canvas, their generators idling low. Orders had come down an hour earlier. If the Germans tried again under cover of darkness, the lights would come on. Miller did not like the idea. Darkness at least preserved some illusion of distance. Light would make everything intimate again. Forward, the infiltrators gained ground. 10 meters, 20, 100. They passed shattered stumps still glowing with embers, stepped over the fallen without looking down. A few reached within grenade range of the American outposts before rifle fire stuttered and ended them. Others slipped deeper, ghosts among ghosts. For a brief moment it seemed possible that the old skills, stealth, patience, the forest's complicity, might yet prevail. Then the searchlights bloomed. It was not gradual. One instant the world was ink. The next it was bathed in cold, amber artificial moonlight scattered down through low cloud. The beams did not point directly at the ground, but upward, reflecting off the overcast to create a ghastly, diffused daylight that erased every shadow. The effect was unearthly. The devastated forest revealed in perfect, merciless clarity, stumps like broken teeth, bodies strewn in frozen attitudes, steam rising from the mud like departing souls. A young technician in the searchlight detachment, barely 19 from Wisconsin, had thrown the switches on command. He stood frozen afterward, staring at what his lights had uncovered. For the first time he saw the enemy not as abstractions, but as individual men caught mid-stride, faces pale and startled in the sudden glare. One German, no more than 30 meters away, looked straight at him across the carnage before the guns began again. Miller needed no order. The moment the light came, he traversed onto the clearest groups and pressed the trigger. The Quad 50s roared back to life, louder now in the illuminated silence. Tracers stitched red lines across the open ground. Men who had almost reached safety spun and fell, uniforms igniting, weapons flung away. The final charge became a staggered, illuminated annihilation. No cover, no surprise, only the mechanical efficiency of volume and production doing its patient work. Von Harbach saw the lights bloom and understood instantly. He rose to a half-crouch, waving the last men back, but there was nowhere to go. A burst caught him across the chest, hurling him against a stump. He slid slowly to the ground, feeling the letter tear and soak with blood. The pain was distant, academic. He thought only that the forest had not betrayed them after all. It had simply been removed, trunk by trunk, life by life, until nothing ancient remained to hide behind. The firing lasted less than 5 minutes. When it stopped, the searchlights remained on, bathing the field in that cold theatrical glow. No movement answered from the German side. A few wounded cried out, voices thin and quickly fading. Then even those sounds ceased. In the bunker, the radio had gone silent long before the lights came on. Brandenberger sat motionless, the handset dangling from its cord. Lehman stood behind him, unwilling to break the quiet. The rain on the roof sounded almost gentle now, as though the storm itself regretted what it had witnessed. The general's eyes rested on the photograph. The young lieutenant's face seemed unchanged, serious, proud, untouched by the night. Brandenberger reached out at last and turned the frame face down. Not in anger, but in recognition. There would be no need to look at it again. Outside, the searchlights burned on, revealing a battlefield stripped of mystery. The ancient pines were gone, reduced to waist-high stumps across a kilometer-wide swath. What remained was raw earth, mud, and the impersonal geometry of industrial killing. By first light, an elite battalion and every illusion that sustained it had been obliterated. Dawn came slowly, a thin gray wash that seeped through the low cloud and diluted the searchlights until they flickered and died. A truce had been arranged by Runner before first light, both sides exhausted, both needing time to collect what remained. The rain had finally stopped, leaving only the drip of water from shattered branches and the low hiss of steam rising from cooling barrels. General Erich Brandenberger emerged from his bunker into a world that smelled of wet earth, pine resin, and death. He wore his greatcoat, but no helmet, as though rank no longer required protection. Lehman followed at a distance, silent as always. They walked the call trail toward Wassenach, past ammunition bearers moving the other way, past wounded helped rearward by comrades who no longer spoke. No one saluted. There was nothing left to salute. The forest ended abruptly, as though a giant blade had sliced it clean. Where ancient pines had stood the night before, there was now only a field of waist-high stumps stretching 500 meters to the American line. Bodies lay among them, German paratroopers in their distinctive camouflage smocks, frozen in the attitudes of their final moments. Some had reached halfway across the open ground before the light and the guns found them. Helmets, rifles, and torn equipment littered the mud like discarded toys. Brandenberger walked slowly through the devastation, boots sinking into the churned earth. He did not search randomly. He knew where the command group would have been, where his son's company had advanced. He passed faces he recognized, young men he had decorated, veterans who had served with him since France. Their eyes stared at the pale sky, unaccusing. Near the center of the field he found Major Klaus von Harbach, propped against a splintered stump, as though resting after a long march. The major's tunic was torn open by multiple hits. Blood had soaked through to the breast pocket. Brandenberger knelt, old knees protesting, and carefully withdrew the folded paper. It was the unfinished letter, now stained dark but still legible. He read the few lines by the growing light, then refolded it and placed it in his own pocket without a word. A few meters away, an American captain approached under a white rag tied to a rifle barrel. He was young, mid-30s, with the tired eyes of a man who had not slept. Sergeant Miller walked behind him, helmet in hand, face streaked with mud. They stopped a respectful distance away. The captain spoke first, English halting but clear. "General, sir, we will help with your wounded and the dead." Brandenberger looked at him for a long moment, taking in the mud-caked uniform, the Thompson submachine gun slung casually, the vehicle tracks behind him leading to the silent M16 half hidden in the tree line. He replied in careful English, voice steady but hollow. "Thank you, Captain. Your weapon, it was effective." The American shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't meant for this, for planes, mostly. But the trees." He trailed off, gesturing at the stump field. Brandenberger nodded slowly. "The trees did not fail us. You simply removed them." Silence settled between them, heavier than any accusation. Miller looked at the bodies, then at the general's face, and felt the same faint unease he had felt in the turret. This was not triumph. It was something colder. Brandenberger's gaze drifted across the devastation. "My son was among them. Lieutenant Karl Brandenberger, 3rd Company." The captain removed his helmet. "I'm sorry, sir." The general inclined his head, accepting the condolence as one soldier to another, then quietly, "You have proven something tonight, Captain. Not that your men are braver or better, only that such qualities no longer decide wars. Factories decide, systems, production. The side that first makes courage unnecessary, that side wins." The American had no reply. He had expected hatred, perhaps contempt. Instead, he received a lesson delivered without bitterness, as though the old general were merely stating a new law of nature. Brandenberger turned away, walking back through the stumps toward his own lines. Lehman fell in beside him. Neither spoke until they reached the first intact trees. Only then did the general pause. He withdrew the blood-stained letter and held it a moment, feeling the weight of words never finished. He thought of his son somewhere in that field, of generations of soldiers who had believed the forest eternal, of Verdun and Moscow and all the battles where human will had still mattered. None of it had prepared him for a night when industry simply erased the ground beneath faith. He placed the letter back in his pocket, next to the photograph he no longer needed to see. The lesson of Hürtgen would echo forward, through Korean ridges swept by napalm and machine guns, through Vietnamese jungles defoliated from the air, through deserts where precision munitions made terrain itself irrelevant. Always the same quiet revelation: no forest is thick enough when the other side decides to remove it. No amount of courage, bloodline, or ancient shelter can withstand the patient arithmetic of mass production. Wars are no longer won by the bravest or the best, but by the nation that first renders bravery unnecessary. In the age of systems, even a father's love becomes just another variable. Some truths are only learned when everything you believed in is obliterated in a single night. Courage had not been defeated that night, it had simply been made irrelevant. Subscribe for more forgotten moments when history quietly revealed the future of war.